Games as a service. Love them or hate them, it's clear this subgenre of games is sticking around. With major success stories like Fortnite and Destiny 2, almost every major publisher and even smaller studios want to get in on a piece of this infinitely stretching pie. But for every success, there are a plethora of games that have disappeared. Just look at Battleborn, Lawbreakers, and even last year's Anthem, which is in an incubation period. But for the time being, I think it's safe to say for right now, BioWare is taking an L on this one. But say you've got your games as a service type game out there, and it's performing well, or at least well enough to have an audience that doesn't disappear in the first week. What do you do next? What is it like to operate a live service game? Well, I've done the research so you don't have to, and today I present to you what it's like to run a games as a service type game. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing for more content from us. First off, let's assume you're making your game available on multiple platforms, since in all likelihood, you're gonna want to. More places for people to play means more people will be playing your game, and that's a good thing. Assuming you've done this, I'd also like to assume that your game is set up for cross-platform play. Now, I know cross-platform capabilities are a somewhat newer feature in games, but moving forward, I can't imagine a newer games as a service type game coming out without the developer and publisher wanting to have their game be cross-platform, and I'll explain why. On the player side of things, it's certainly more consumer-friendly, allowing gamers to play with their friends regardless of which hardware they own. But for developers, it also leads to a larger player base, and longer gameplay sessions and retention. Also, while in the process of setting up your game for cross-platform play, you'll be able to make what's called an IAM, or Identity and Access Management System. And this is going to do a lot of things for you. First off, it will streamline the ability for cross-platform play to occur. Before cross-platform was even a buzzword, each game, even if it was published on multiple platforms, would be set up to each online service. Steamworks, PSN, etc. And this kept the players on those platforms locked to playing with others in their own ecosystem. But if the developer has their own IAM system, then all the other online services can connect to that. And through the IAM, they connect to all the other online services. Okay, cool. Crossplay is set up. But having an IAM system will do more for you than just that. It will generate a user ID for each player, so that way even if they do end up playing on a different system, you'll know that it's still just one unique player. For example, Shadowhunter 420 on Xbox Live could be Mr. Zombie Balls on PSN. And by knowing this, you won't mistake him for two separate players and falsely inflate your active user count. And speaking of numbers, being able to identify players will also help you track how your game is performing. Each platform has its own mechanism to track player behavior, but most game publishers are going to want their own mechanism. This is because some platforms won't share their info with the developers and publishers, and some that do don't always track the data that game creators would like to know. Some examples of this being, what time of day do most players log in and log out? And you can also learn preferences about players in different parts of the world, such as what multiplayer maps do players in Europe prefer compared to players in North America. And you can even learn things like what part of the game people are struggling on. And of course, having access to the data of your players gives you the most important info, such as CCU, concurrent users, DAU, daily active users, and MAU, monthly active users. All of these can be used to track the health of your game and understand when or why players might be falling off and moving on to something else, which can help inform the developer when they might need to start injecting new content to keep players coming back. Depending on what type of game you're running, there are all kinds of different things you can do to keep it fresh for your player base. If you're a hero shooter, say Overwatch or Apex Legends, you can introduce a new character and include a fancy trailer which will generate some buzz online. If you're an open-world RPG like Final Fantasy XIV or even The Division 2, you can introduce a whole new map or increase the level cap and add new mechanics and abilities. Or you can do something completely off the wall and host a concert featuring a huge musician, or even have your entire game sucked into a black hole and prevent anyone from playing it for a few days. Running a live service game often involves implementing a design philosophy that's becoming more common in operating any form of software that is consistently updating and changing to meet the needs of those who use it. And that philosophy is called DevOps. DevOps can be complicated to understand, so I'm going to explain how it works only in relation to running live service games. DevOps is separated into two major parts: development and operations. Development refers to what we normally think of when we're talking about game development. People sitting at computers, coding, designing, etc. And operations refers to the live portion of the game. meaning everything that has to happen to keep the service running smoothly. But it can be broken down into even smaller sections. Starting off with planning. This is figuring out what is going to be in the next iteration or patch of the game and creating a roadmap for how this work is going to be done. Next is the coding. Straightforward. The development, designing, and yes, literally the coding of the game. Then comes the building, putting all the pieces that were developed into a test version of the game and building it. This is essentially making the game a .executable. And finally on the development side is the testing. This is the QA portion of game development. In the initial release of the game, this would be much longer. But during live development, especially with the more incremental upgrades that we see nowadays, this needs to be much shorter. And even the game's dedicated fans can be involved with public test servers. This can help build a greater connection between the community and the team working on the game. Moving on to the operations side of things, we first start off with release, gathering everything that's been taken from the build step, as well as the fixes applied during the test step, and putting it out there. Next up is deployment. This is getting the game to the servers and users, as well as deploying anything needed to support it being delivered to the public, such as additional servers if needed. Following this is operate. This is the kit and caboodle of this side of DevOps, quite literally the running of the game. And finally, monitoring. Here the developers will watch the live statistics for both the health of the servers and other statistics that they're receiving from their players. The information gathered from this then feeds back into plan, and the cycle continues. It's important to not think of DevOps as a cycle where one section is the key focus at any point in time, but that all sections are constantly firing to help keep the game running and improving. They communicate with each other to help inform the rest of the team what will be best for the game to help keep their players invested. The mantra of the DevOps system is fail fast, fail early, continuously learn, and continuously deliver. And now I'd like to talk briefly about the toll that constantly updating a game can have on a studio. I think it's hard to deny that Fortnite is probably leading the way as far as constantly adding new features and content into its game, especially in regards to how unique some of these features can be. Well, back in April of 2019, Polygon published a pretty large piece on how crunch is leading to burnout for the people working on the game at Epic. And it's not just because of the constant new modes or concerts, just adding in skins and other features and then having to playtest those features and make sure it doesn't crash or bug the game is brutal. And crunch is not the only complication. From an engineering perspective, there is only so much that you can update your game in a short period of time. Releasing an update not only requires certification, which takes time, on some platforms developers have to pay to put out patches. And since the game is always online, gamers have to stop playing to install the update. And if you're constantly bombarding them with updates every time they log in, then they could get annoyed and just as easily jump off to play something else. And now that we've made it this far in the video, we're talking monetization. Easily the most controversial part about the games as a service model. Depending on your type of game, you have to consider how you want to monetize it to your players. In recent years, we've seen the rise of battle passes. And while it was popularized by Fortnite, the concept was used as early as 2013 in Dota 2 with the Compendium. The Battle Pass concept is simple. You pay some money up front, unlocking some things at the start, and giving you more rewards based on how much you play the game. And it's been very successful. Like I said, Fortnite popularized the concept, but now it's in everything from Apex Legends, Destiny 2, Rocket League, Rainbow Six Siege, hell, even PUBG, the game that inspired Fortnite, put it in its own Battle Pass. And for the most part, gamers seem to be okay with this model, at least in comparison to the dreaded loot box, which has been actually ruled illegal in some countries. Of course, you'll have to figure out what monetization model works best for your game, but no matter what, you'll need to create some form of in-game currency. This allows you to not only set up some form of global economy, so no matter what platform or where in the world a player is enjoying your game from, they can make in-game purchases. But it also lets you track the average revenue per user and even what purchases your player base seem more interested in. Not just to make more money from them, although this definitely is part of it, but to learn more ways to make them happy and ensure they keep coming back to play your game. Ultimately, live service games are a long-term commitment for both the developer and publisher, but also for the players. In a perfect world, you've created an enjoyable experience that is almost symbiotic, where the player is enjoying and communicating their experience, and the developer is taking that information, interpreting it, and crafting the future of the game. Making a good live service game is incredibly difficult, and keeping an active player base is even harder. What are some features that games as a service type games have done that you've enjoyed? And what are some things they've done that you've hated? Let us know about it in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider following us on our Twitch, where we do a weekly gaming news talk show going over the current news in gaming. And if you appreciate what we do here and have a few bucks to toss our way, consider heading over to our Patreon. We'd really appreciate it. But until next time, thank you once again for watching, and have a wonderful day.